Hey guys, tonight we begin with something we all take for granted. Survival, or more specifically, how you'd die horribly in ancient Egypt within approximately 24 hours despite thinking you'd do just fine because you've watched documentaries and played Assassin's Creed. So, before you get comfortable in your climate-controlled room with your filtered water and your absence of flesh-eating parasites, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these reality checks about how soft modern life has made us. And let me know in the comments how long you honestly think you'd last in ancient Egypt and what would probably kill you first. It's always fascinating to see who's delusional enough to think they'd thrive. Now settle in with your modern conveniences you desperately miss, and let's explore why you'd be begging for death by noon on your first day in the land of the pharaohs. Before we even discuss the diseases, the labor, or the casual brutality, let's start with the moment you arrive, the heat. Not the dry heat you might experience in Arizona with your air-conditioned car and iced beverages. Egyptian heat was a malevolent entity that actively tried to kill you. Summer temperatures reached 120 km in the shade, except there was no shade because trees were luxury items. The sun wasn't just bright, it was a hostile force that caused immediate burns on exposed skin. Modern humans would develop sun poisoning within hours, experiencing nausea, fever, and blistering that ancient Egyptians would watch with the detached interest of seeing natural selection in real time. But the heat was just the welcome mat. The sun would blind you, literally. The combination of direct sunlight and reflection off sand and limestone created conditions that caused photokeratitis, sunburn of the eyeballs. Your eyes would feel like someone poured sand into them, which was ironic because sand would also literally be in them constantly. Ancient Egyptians developed eye makeup, partly for protection. That thick kohl wasn't just fashion, but functional sun protection. You'd be effectively blind by day 2, stumbling around like a drunk tourist who lost their sunglasses, except there's no hotel to stumble back to. The water situation would kill most modern people within days. The Nile was your only water source, and it was basically a biological weapon in liquid form. Schistosomiasis, also called snail fever, was endemic. Microscopic worms living in snails would penetrate your skin just from wading in the water. They'd travel through your bloodstream, mature in your liver, and produce eggs that would slowly destroy your organs. But that's the long-term problem. Short-term, you'd get dysentery from the bacteria, giardia from the protozoa, and various other waterborne diseases that would have you expelling fluids from both ends until you died of dehydration while surrounded by water you couldn't drink. Oh, you think you'd boil the water with what? Wood was precious and imported. Most people used dried dung for fuel, if they had fuel at all. And even if you could boil water, you'd need a pot, which you don't have, and the knowledge that boiling prevents disease, which wouldn't be discovered for another 3,000 years. You'd drink the Nile water because the alternative was death by dehydration, then die anyway from what you drank. The food would revolt your modern stomach immediately. Bread was the staple, but it contained sand and grit from the grinding stones. Every bite would wear down your teeth. Ancient Egyptian mummies show severe dental wear by age 30, but that's assuming you could digest the bread. It was often made from emmer wheat, which modern humans rarely consume. Your gut bacteria, adapted to processed foods and preservatives, would have no idea what to do with ancient grains. You'd experience bloating, cramping, and digestive issues that would compound your waterborne diseases. The protein sources would be worse. Fish from the Nile were full of parasites. Meat was rarely fresh, usually dried or salted to the point of being leather. Vegetables existed but were fertilized with human and animal waste, adding another vector for disease. Your immune system, weakened by modern hygiene, would be overwhelmed. You'd be simultaneously starving and unable to eat without violent illness. But let's say you somehow survive the plunge and find safe food and water. Now comes your job, because everyone worked in ancient Egypt, including children, the elderly, and especially you, the soft-handed time traveler. If you're lucky, you're a farmer. If you're unlucky, you're building pyramids. Either way, you're dead. Farming meant working flooded fields full of parasites. Bilharzia worms would enter through your feet. Hookworms would burrow through your skin. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes would feast on you constantly. You'd be bent over in muddy water from dawn to dusk, your back screaming, your hands blistered, your feet rotting from constant moisture. The tools were primitive wood and copper that required massive effort for minimal result. Your soft modern hands would be bleeding within an hour, infected within a day, gangrenous within a week. Pyramid construction was worse. You'd be moving limestone blocks weighing tons, using ropes, logs, and human muscle. The ropes were rough papyrus that would shred your hands. The logs gave splinters that became infected in the heat. One slip and a block would crush you. One wrong lift and your back would give out. The overseers wouldn't care about your pain. Complaining meant beatings. Working meant exhaustion. Not working meant death. The accidents were constant and catastrophic. No safety regulations. No protective equipment. No workers' compensation. Break a bone, if you're lucky, someone might try to set it, probably incorrectly, leading to permanent disability. Cut yourself, no antibiotics meant infection, and likely death. The mortality rate on construction projects was so high, they had dedicated burial grounds for workers. You'd probably be in one within a week. Let's talk about the social structure that would crush your modern sensibilities. Unless you were born into nobility, which you weren't, you had zero social mobility. You were what your father was, doing what your grandfather did, living where your family always lived. Your modern ideas about individual rights, personal freedom, and choosing your own path would be considered insane at best, treasonous at worst. Women had it particularly rough. Yes, ancient Egypt was relatively progressive for its time, but that's like saying smallpox was relatively pleasant compared to bubonic plague. If you're a woman, you're property. You can be divorced for not producing sons. You're legally considered less reliable as a witness. You can't hold most positions of power. Your husband can beat you for disobedience, and it's legally and socially acceptable. If you're a man, you're conscripted for labor projects whenever the state demands. Refuse and you're beaten or killed. Your taxes are paid in labor or grain. Can't pay, your family becomes slaves. There's no appeal process, no civil rights lawyers, no social media to complain on. The pharaoh is a living god, and questioning a god's decisions, both blasphemy and treason. The justice system would terrify you. Accused of a crime. Torture was a standard interrogation technique. They'd beat you with sticks, stretch your limbs, or worse, until you confessed. Innocent, doesn't matter if you confess under torture. Punishments included mutilation, cutting off noses, ears, or hands. Death sentences were creative. Impalement, burning, being eaten by crocodiles. And these weren't for major crimes. Steal some grain because you're starving, lose a hand, speak against a noble, lose your tongue. The medical care would kill you faster than no medical care. Egyptian medicine mixed practical knowledge with magic, ingredients that were actively harmful. Have a headache? Here's a dead mouse to eat. Infected wound? Let's pact it with dung. Broken bone? We'll set it wrong and wrap it in linen soaked in substances that prevent healing. The surgical tools were unsterilized copper and flint. The anesthesia was beer if you were lucky, a blow to the head if you weren't. Physicians were also priests, so medical treatment involved prayers, amulets, and rituals that took precedence over actual care. Your illness was probably caused by demons or divine displeasure. Treatment focused on appeasing the gods rather than addressing symptoms. Refuse the religious aspects of treatment? That's blasphemy. Accept them? You die from lack of actual medical care. The infectious diseases would overwhelm your modern immune system immediately. Tuberculosis was endemic. Malaria was constant. Smallpox came in waves. Plague appeared regularly. These diseases that we've mostly eliminated or can easily treat would rampage through your unprotected system. Your vaccinations mean nothing here. Your antibiotics don't exist. Your clean medical history makes you more vulnerable, not less. The parasites deserve their own horror story. Lice were universal, head lice, body lice, pubic lice. Everyone had them. They carried typhus and other diseases. Fleas were everywhere, carrying plague. Intestinal worms were so common that not having them was unusual. Tapeworms could grow 30 feet long in your intestines. Guinea worms would emerge from your skin over weeks of agony. These weren't risks, they were certainties. Let's discuss the housing that would slowly poison you. If you're poor, which you would be, you live in a mud brick house that dissolves in rain and harbors diseases. The walls are full of insects. The roof leaks. There's no ventilation except a door, which you can't close because you'll suffocate from the cold smoke of your dung fire. The floor is packed earth full of parasites. Your bed is a mud brick platform or the floor itself. Your blanket is rough linen that irritates your skin. Rats and mice share your space, bringing disease and eating what little food you have. Scorpions hide in corners. Snakes seek warmth at night. You'd wake up with cobra bites or scorpion stings that would kill you in hours with no antivenom available. Your toilet doesn't exist. You use a pot that's emptied into the street or fields. The smell is overwhelming. Flies swarm constantly, spreading disease from waste to food to wounds. Privacy doesn't exist. Hygiene is impossible. You'd develop infections from the smallest cuts because everything is contaminated with fecal matter. The clothing situation would destroy your skin. Linen was the only fabric, and rough linen at that. It would chafe your skin raw in the heat. You'd have one or maybe two garments that you'd wear continuously. Washing meant beating clothes on rocks with natron, sodium carbonate, that would irritate your skin. The clothes would never really be clean, just different levels of dirty. Your modern feet couldn't handle the footwear or lack thereof. Most people went barefoot on burning sand, sharp rocks, and thorns. Sandals were papyrus or leather that offered minimal protection. Your soft feet would be cut, burned, and infected within hours. Walking anywhere would become agony. But you'd have to walk everywhere because animals were for the wealthy and boats were for transport, not personal travel. The insects would drive you to madness. Flies were so numerous that they're depicted in hieroglyphs as a symbol of persistence. They'd cover your food, your face, your wounds. Mosquitoes would attack in clouds at dusk. Bedbugs would feast on you at night. Sandflies would burrow into your skin. There was no repellent, no netting, no escape. You'd be covered in bites that would become infected from scratching with dirty fingernails. Now let's talk about the psychological trauma. You're isolated from everyone and everything you know. No internet, no phones, no way to contact home. You can't speak the language. Ancient Egyptian is dead, and even if you knew some phrases, the pronunciation is guesswork. You can't read or write hieroglyphics or hieratic script. You're effectively mute and illiterate. The culture shock would be devastating. Public executions were entertainment. Animal sacrifice was routine. Human sacrifice happened during certain periods. Children died constantly. Infant mortality was around 30%. Death was everywhere and treated casually. Your modern sensitivity to violence and death would mark you as weak and strange. The religion would be incomprehensible and mandatory. You'd be expected to participate in rituals you don't understand for gods you don't believe in. Refuse and you're marked as cursed. The religious calendar determined everything: when to plant, when to harvest, when to marry, when to travel. Missing religious obligations meant social ostracism at best, death at worst. The noise would prevent sleep. No sound insulation meant you'd hear everything: neighbors fighting, animals dying, children crying, and the constant buzzing of insects. Night brought different terrors: jackals howling, lions roaring. Yes, lions lived in Egypt then, and the screams of people dying from diseases or violence. The darkness at night would terrify you. No streetlights, no flashlights, just oil lamps if you could afford oil, which you couldn't. The darkness was absolute. Criminals used darkness for cover. Animals hunted at night. Going outside after dark meant risking death from human or animal predators. Let's discuss the Nile floods that would end you. The annual flood was essential for agriculture, but catastrophic if you weren't prepared. Too little flood meant famine. Too much meant your mud brick house dissolved. The flood brought crocodiles into inhabited areas. It brought diseases. It brought displaced wildlife seeking higher ground where you lived. During flood season, work didn't stop. You'd be working in chest-deep water full of parasites, snakes, and crocodiles. One wrong step into a hole and you'd drown. The current was strong enough to sweep you away. The Egyptians who grew up with this knew how to navigate it. You'd be dead the first time you tried to cross a flooded field. The crocodiles deserve special attention. Nile crocodiles are aggressive, intelligent, and huge, up to 20 feet long. They were everywhere in the Nile and its tributaries. They actively hunted humans, washing clothes, getting water, fishing, all potentially fatal activities. The Egyptians worshipped Sobek, the crocodile god, partly out of fear. You'd understand that fear the first time you saw a crocodile death roll its victim. Hippopotamuses were worse. Yes, they lived in ancient Egypt and they killed more people than crocodiles. They're territorial, aggressive, and can bite a human in half. They capsized boats for fun. They attacked without provocation. The Egyptians considered them forces of chaos, and for good reason. Your modern idea of hippos as cute, fat animals would die with you when one charged at 30 mph. The snakes would ensure you never relaxed. Egyptian cobras, vipers, and other venomous snakes were common. They hid in houses for warmth, in fields for prey, in storage areas for rodents. Antivenom didn't exist. A cobra bite meant death within hours. The Egyptians worshipped snakes and feared them equally. You'd probably die reaching into a storage jar without checking first. The scorpions were everywhere, in your shoes, in your clothes, in your bed. The Deathstalker scorpion's name isn't hyperbole. Its venom causes excruciating pain, fever, convulsions, and death. Children and weakened adults, like you, would be died frequently from stings. Checking everything before touching it would become reflexive, but you'd forget once, and once would be enough. Let's address the slavery question, because there's a good chance you'd end up enslaved. Debt slavery was common. Can't pay taxes. Enslaved. Commit a crime. Enslaved. Foreign captive. Enslaved. Wrong place. Wrong time. Enslaved. Slaves had no rights, no recourse, no hope of freedom except through death. As a slave, you'd work the worst jobs, mining, quarrying, or domestic service, that included being sexually available to your owners. Refuse and you're beaten or killed. Try to escape and you're hunted down, mutilated, and either killed or returned to worse conditions. Your modern concepts of human rights would be literally beaten out of you. The mining work would kill you quickly. Gold mines in the eastern desert were death sentences. You'd work in narrow tunnels in complete darkness, except for oil lamps that consumed oxygen. Cave-ins were common. The heat was unbearable. Water was scarce. You'd work until you died, which averaged about 3 months. The quarrying was marginally better, only point because you'd die in sunlight. Cutting granite with copper tools and dolerite balls required hitting stone thousands of times to make any progress. Your hands would be destroyed. Your back would break. Accidents with falling rocks were constant. The dust would destroy your lungs. Silicosis would kill you if trauma didn't first. Now let's talk about the military service you couldn't escape. Every male could be conscripted. Training was brutal, forced marches in full heat, weapons training that resulted in regular injuries, and discipline maintained through beatings. Desert campaigns meant marching for days without adequate water, fighting enemies who knew the terrain, and dying from exposure if battle didn't kill you. The weapons would be completely foreign to you. Bows required years of training to use effectively. Spears and kopis swords required strength and technique you don't have. Shields were heavy wood and copper hide that would exhaust you in minutes. Armor was minimal, leather or linen that offered little protection. You'd be cannon fodder, literally human shields for more valuable troops. Battle tactics involved chariot charges, which would trample you if enemy weapons didn't kill you first. No Geneva Convention meant prisoners were often tortured, mutilated, or executed in creative ways. Surrender wasn't always accepted. Retreat meant execution by your own side. You'd die whether you fought, fled, or surrendered. The psychological warfare would break you. Enemies collected hands or penises from dead soldiers as trophies. Bodies were mutilated to prevent afterlife existence. Watching this happen to comrades while knowing it awaited you would destroy morale. The Egyptians were used to this. You'd be catatonic with terror. Let's discuss pregnancy and childbirth, which would be death sentences for modern women. Prenatal care consisted of amulets and prayers. Labor happened at home, with midwives who had no understanding of germs. Complications meant death. Breech, birth, death. Excessive bleeding, death. Infection, death. The maternal mortality rate was around 1 in 3. If you survived childbirth, keeping your baby alive would be nearly impossible. No formula meant breastfeed or watch your baby starve. No vaccines meant watching your children die from preventable diseases. No antibiotics meant every fever could be fatal. The emotional trauma of losing multiple children would destroy modern parents who expect all their children to survive. Child rearing would horrify you. Children worked from age 5 or 6. Education was for the wealthy only. Physical punishment was standard and severe. Children were property, not individuals, with rights. Your modern parenting ideals would rights. Your modern parenting ideals would wiki F rights. Your modern parenting ideals would be considered weakness that endangered the child's survival. The lack of privacy would drive you insane. Multi-generational families lived in 1 or 2 rooms. Sex, bathroom functions, illness, death, all happened in shared spaces. Personal space didn't exist. Solitude was impossible. The constant presence of others watching, judging, and interfering would break modern minds used to privacy. The entertainment options would bore you to tears. No books unless you were literate in hieroglyphics. No plays unless you lived in a major city. No sports unless you count watching public executions. Board games existed but required opponents and leisure time you wouldn't have. Music was simple drums and flutes. Your dopamine-addicted modern brain would go into withdrawal. Let's talk about the time perception that would disorient you completely. No clocks meant time was measured by the sun. No calendars like ours meant dates were based on Pharaoh's reign, years, and religious festivals. Planning was impossible without standardized time. You'd never know exactly when anything was supposed to happen. The transportation would exhaust you. Walking was standard. Donkeys were for the wealthy. Boats were for cargo. A journey that takes us hours would take days or weeks. Visiting nearby towns meant dangerous multi-day trips. You'd be essentially trapped in your village, unable to escape even if you knew where to go. The communication barriers would isolate you completely. Most people were illiterate. Writing a buoyant message required a scribe who charged fees you couldn't afford. Messages traveled at walking speed. News of disasters arrived after they struck. You'd be cut off from all information beyond your immediate vicinity. The bureaucracy would make modern DMVs look efficient. Everything required approval from multiple officials who expected bribes. Documents were on papyrus that deteriorated quickly. Records were kept haphazardly. One administrative error could destroy your life with no appeal process. Let's discuss the hair situation. Lice were so prevalent that many Egyptians shaved their heads and wore wigs. But wigs were expensive, made from human hair or plant fibers. You'd either have lice-infested hair or a bald head burning in the sun. Both options involved constant discomfort and stacked social judgment. Your teeth would rot out of your head. The sand inbred ground down enamel. The lack of dental hygiene meant cavities and abscesses. The only dentistry was extraction with no anesthesia. Infected teeth could kill through blood poisoning. You'd be in constant dental pain with no relief. The makeup situation would poison you. Coal contained lead and antimony. Green eye makeup contained copper. These heavy metals would accumulate in your system, causing neurological damage. But not wearing makeup meant sun damage and social ostracism. You'd have to choose between slow poisoning and immediate suffering. Mental health support didn't exist. Depression was demon possession. Anxiety was divine displeasure. Schizophrenia was prophecy or curse. Treatment involved exorcism, bloodletting or trepanation, drilling holes in the skull. Your modern mental health challenges would be interpreted as spiritual problems requiring painful solutions. The taxation system would impoverish you immediately. Taxes were paid in grain or labor. Tax collectors were corrupt, taking more than required. Can't pay, your property was seized. Still can't pay, you and your family became state slaves. The only escape from taxes was death, and they'd tax your family for your funeral. Speaking of funerals, you couldn't afford proper burial. Mummification was for the wealthy. You'd be buried in the desert sand, where your body would naturally desiccate if animals didn't dig you up first. No afterlife preparations meant, according to Egyptian belief, your soul would be destroyed. Even death offered no escape from poverty. The pregnancy tests would disgust you. Women urinated on wheat and barley seeds. If they sprouted, you were pregnant. If wheat grew faster, it was a boy. Barley meant a girl. This actually worked, sometimes due to hormones in urine, but the growing medium was often contaminated with feces, adding another disease vector. Contraception was nightmarish. Crocodile dung mixed with honey as a vaginal suppository. Acacia gum, which actually has some spermicidal properties, mixed with dates and honey. These methods caused infections, allergic reactions, and toxic shock. Pregnancy was often preferable to contraception. The beauty standards would destroy your body. Thin was considered poor and ugly. You'd need to gain weight to be attractive, but the food available would make you sick. Pale skin was desirable, but sun protection didn't exist beyond clothing you couldn't afford. You'd be considered hideously ugly by Egyptian standards while dying from poor their beauty practices. The superstitions would control your life. Every action had magical significance. Certain days were unlucky for specific activities. Dreams predicted the future. Animals were omens. You'd be paralyzed by trying to navigate thousands of supernatural rules that everyone else knew instinctively. Let's talk about the marketplace where you'd be cheated constantly. No standardized currency meant bartering for everything. You wouldn't know fair values. Merchants would recognize you as foreign and charge multiples of normal prices. Arguing meant accusations of theft. You'd trade everything you had for a fraction of its value. The animal attacks would be constant. Beyond crocodiles and hippos, there were lions, leopards, hyenas, and wild dogs. Venomous snakes and scorpions were everywhere. Even domesticated animals were dangerous. Oxen could gore you, donkeys could kick you, and dogs carried rabies. Every animal interaction was potentially fatal. The construction materials would poison you. Mud bricks contained bacteria and parasites. Limestone dust caused respiratory diseases. Copper tools left toxic residue. Lead was used in glazes and cosmetics. Asbestos was woven into fabric. You'd be slowly poisoned by everything around you. Now for the weather events that would kill you. Sandstorms could bury entire villages. They'd strip skin from your body and fill your lungs with dust. Flash floods in desert areas gave no warning. Extreme temperature variations meant freezing nights after blazing days. Your body couldn't adapt quickly enough. The food storage would horrify you. No refrigeration meant food spoiled quickly. Grain was stored in conditions that encouraged mold and rat infestations. Meat was dried in open air covered with flies. Fermentation was often indistinguishable from rot. You'd have to choose between starvation and food poisoning. Your digestive system would be in constant rebellion. The different bacteria in fermented foods, the parasites in water, the sand in bread, the spoiled ingredients. Your gut would never adapt. You'd have chronic diarrhea, leading to dehydration and electrolyte imbalances that would kill you without modern medical intervention. The workplace injuries would accumulate. No workers' compensation meant injuries ended careers and lives. A farmer with a broken hand couldn't work and would starve. A builder with a bad back became a beggar. Every small injury was potentially life-ending because it prevented work, which prevented eating. Let's discuss the child mortality you'd witness. 3 out of 10 children died before age 1. Half died before reaching adulthood. You'd watch children die from diarrhea, respiratory infections, accidents, and diseases we prevent with simple vaccines. The psychological trauma of constant child death would break modern parents. The gender-specific dangers need addressing. Women faced death in childbirth, sexual violence with no recourse, and limited legal rights. Men faced conscription, dangerous labor, and expectation to provide despite impossible circumstances. Both genders suffered, just differently. The religious festivals would exhaust you. Mandatory participation in multi-day celebrations involving fasting, processions, and offerings you couldn't afford. Missing them meant social ostracism. Participating meant losing work, days you needed to survive. You'd be trapped between starvation and social death. The agricultural cycle would dominate your existence. Everything depended on the Nile flood. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant destruction. You'd spend your entire life at the mercy of river levels you couldn't predict or control. One bad flood and everyone you knew would starve. The corruption would make survival impossible even if you avoided everything else. Officials demanded bribes for basic services. Police were thugs who extorted protection money. Judges were bought by the wealthy. The system was designed to exploit the poor, which included you. Let's talk about wounds that wouldn't heal. Every cut in the dirty environment would become infected. No antibiotics meant infections spread. Gangrene was common. Amputation with common. Amputation with common. Amputation with common. Copper sores and no anesthesia was the only treatment. Most people died from shock or subsequent infection. The common malnutrition would weaken you progressively. The limited diet lacked essential vitamins and minerals. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C. Rickets from lack of vitamin D. Anemia from lack of iron. Pellagra from lack of niacin. Each burgle deficiency would compound your vulnerability to everything else. The social violence would shock you. Beatings were normal discipline. Murders often went unpunished if the victim was poor. Rape was a property crime against the woman's father or husband, not a crime against the woman. Violence was the standard solution to most problems. Your modern skills would be useless. Computer knowledge? Worthless. Customer service experience? Irrelevant. College degree? Meaningless. You'd have no marketable skills in a society that needed farmers, builders, and soldiers. Your entire professional identity would be erased. The language barrier would never improve. Ancient Egyptian is a dead language with uncertain pronunciation. Even if you learned some words, regional dialects would confuse you. You'd be permanently isolated by inability to communicate complex thoughts or understand cultural nuances. The hygiene practices would sicken you. Egyptians bathed but in the same contaminated water everyone else used. Soap was natron, which burned skin. Toilets were shared and rarely cleaned. Menstruation was handled with papyrus and rags that couldn't be properly sanitized. Every hygiene attempt introduced new contamination. Let's address the dating and marriage situation. Marriages were arranged economic transactions. Love wasn't a consideration. Women married at puberty to men chosen by their fathers. Divorce was possible, but left women destitute. Your modern ideas about consensual romantic relationships would be incomprehensible. The childhood diseases you escaped would find you. Polio, measles, mumps, whooping cough, diseases you're vaccinated against but which ravaged ancient populations. Your adult body encountering these diseases for the first time would react more severely than poor children's bodies. You'd likely die from something modern children routinely survive. The catering system would trap you immediately. No social mobility meant born poor, die poor. No credit system meant no way to improve your situation. No bankruptcy protection meant debt followed you forever. One bad harvest and you'd become a debt slave. The entertainment violence would disturb you. Public executions were family events. Animal fights were popular entertainment. Watching people and animals die horribly was considered fun. Your modern sensibilities would mark you as weak and strange. Let's talk about the infections that would never stop. Urinary tract infections from poor hygiene and contaminated water. Respiratory infections from dust and smoke. Skin infections from insect bites and scratches. Eye infections from flies and sand. You'd always be fighting multiple infections simultaneously. The chronic pain would break you. From teeth, from work injuries, from infections, from parasites. No effective painkillers except beer and opium if you could afford it. You'd be in constant, untreated pain that would drive you to madness or suicide. The pregnancy beliefs would endanger you. Pregnant women were considered vulnerable to evil spirits. They wore amulets and performed rituals instead of receiving medical care. Complications were blamed on spiritual failures. Modern prenatal care concepts would be considered dangerous interference with divine will. The infant feeding practices would horrify you. Babies were given adult food early, often contaminated. Wet nurses were common but often malnourished themselves. Formula didn't exist. Babies either got breast milk or died. The casual acceptance of infant death would traumatize modern parents. Your clothing would disintegrate quickly. Modern fabrics wouldn't survive the harsh washing methods. Ancient linen would irritate your skin. You'd be naked or uncomfortable, both socially unacceptable. Making new clothes required skills you don't have and materials you couldn't afford. The writing system would remain incomprehensible. Hieroglyphics had over 700 symbols. Hieratic script was worse. Literacy took years of study from childhood. You'd be permanently illiterate, unable to read warnings, laws, or religious texts, marking you as lower class forever. The cooking would poison you. No refrigeration meant questionable ingredients. Cooking fuel was scarce, meaning undercooking was common. Storage containers were porous and contaminated. Every meal was a gamble between starvation and food poisoning. Let's discuss the vermin that would infest your life. Rats in your grain, mice in your bed, locusts in your fields, flies on everything, mosquitoes in clouds, lice in your hair, fleas in your clothes. You'd never be free from things crawling on you, biting you, infesting you. The seasonal diseases would strike predictably. Malaria season, plague season, dysentery season. You'd know death was coming but be powerless to prevent it. Watching epidemics approach like slow-motion disasters would create constant anxiety. The accident rate would be astronomical. No safety equipment, no safety regulations, no safety culture. Construction accidents, agricultural accidents, domestic accidents, all common and often fatal. You'd see people maimed and killed daily in preventable accidents. The medication would make things worse. Consuming mouse feces for digestive issues, honey and crocodile dung for wounds, prayers and amulets instead of treatment. The cures would often accelerate death rather than prevent it. Your sleep would be constantly interrupted by insects, by heat, by cold, by noise, by fear. Exhaustion would accumulate, weakening your immune system and decision-making. You'd never feel rested, always operating at diminished capacity. The domestic violence would be inescapable. Beating wives and children was normal and legal. Neighbors wouldn't intervene. There were no shelters, no police to call, no escape. You'd witness or experience violence daily with no recourse. Let's talk about the infections from water. Not just drinking, bathing, washing, wading. Every water contact risked parasites and bacteria. You'd have to choose between hygiene and health, cleanliness and contamination. The work hours would break you, dawn to dusk labor with no weekends, no vacation, no sick leave. Religious festivals were the only break, and those required expensive offerings. You'd work every day until you died, probably while working. The sandstorms would suffocate you. They came with little warning, filling the air with dust so thick you couldn't see or breathe. They lasted hours or days. They buried entire buildings. You'd choke on sand while trying to protect yourself with nothing but linen. The economic inflation would impoverish you. Bad harvests meant grain prices soared. You'd watch your savings become worthless. Barter values would shift overnight. Economic security was impossible for anyone but the very wealthy. The medical experiments would kill you. Egyptian medicine included drilling holes in skulls, packing wounds with dung, and consuming toxic substances. Being sick meant risking death from treatment as much as disease. Let's address the reality of ancient Egyptian slavery. You could become enslaved through debt, crime, or capture. Slaves could be beaten, killed, or sold at will. Freedom was rare. Your modern values about human rights would mean nothing. You might die fighting a system everyone else accepted as normal. The isolation from modernity would cause severe depression. No technology, no modern comforts, no escape. You'd know what you were missing but be powerless to recreate it. The psychological impact of permanent technological regression would be devastating. The religious requirements would exhaust your resources. Offerings to multiple gods, temple taxes, funeral preparations, all mandatory and expensive. Failing to meet religious obligations meant divine punishment, which everyone would blame for community misfortunes. Your immune system would collapse from the constant assault. Multiple parasites, chronic infections, malnutrition, exhaustion. Your body would be fighting too many battles simultaneously. Something that should be minor would kill you because you had no reserves left. The fatal mistakes would be easy to make: drinking the wrong water, eating the wrong food, offending the wrong person, entering the wrong area, missing the wrong religious ceremony. One error in a complex society you don't understand could be immediately fatal. As we near the end of our journey through why you die horribly in ancient Egypt, let's be clear about something. This isn't about calling ancient Egyptians primitive or modern humans superior. They were adapted to their environment through generations of selection and cultural evolution. You're not. Every complaint I've listed, every disease, every hardship, ancient Egyptians dealt with these daily and survived, even thrived enough to build one of history's greatest civilizations. They created architecture we struggle to replicate, developed mathematics we still use, and established agricultural systems that fed millions. But you're optimized for modern life. Your immune system expects vaccines and antibiotics. Your body expects clean water and safe food. Your mind expects rights, privacy, and individual freedom. You're a precisely tuned machine for the 21st century trying to function in the 30th century BCE. The ancient Egyptians would be equally lost in our world. The technology would baffle them. The social structures would confuse them. The lack of religious certainty would terrify them. The individual isolation would drive them mad. They're optimized for their world, not ours. But here's the harsh truth: you wouldn't last a day. The water alone would start killing you within hours. The sun would blind and burn you. The food would poison you. The work would break you. The diseases would ravage you. The society would reject you. The environment would consume you. Your soft hands would bleed. Your weak back would break. Your modern sensibilities would be violated. Your expectations would be shattered. Your body would fail. Your mind would fracture. You'd beg for death, and death would come. Probably quickly, certainly painfully. This isn't tough love or motivation to be grateful. It's recognition that we're products of our environment adapted to our specific time and place. The skills that make you successful today would be useless then. The knowledge you prize would be worthless. The person you are wouldn't exist. So next time you romanticize the past, remember this: you die there. Quickly, horribly, and probably from something stupid like drinking water or eating bread. The past wasn't simpler or better. It was brutal, short, and full of suffering we can barely imagine. But also remember this: humans survived it. Through intelligence, cooperation, and incredible resilience, they built civilizations from nothing but mud and determination. They created beauty in the midst of horror. They found joy despite constant death. They were tougher than we'll ever need to be. So yes, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to last in your world, with its different but very real challenges. You're optimized for now, not then, and that's exactly as it should be. The ancient Egyptians faced their challenges and built pyramids. You face yours and build, well, whatever you're building. Different challenges, different tools, same human spirit trying to survive another day. But still, you definitely die in ancient Egypt. Probably before lunch. Almost certainly before dinner. Definitely before you figured out how to properly worship Ra. And that's the most honest history lesson you'll ever receive. Sleep well in your climate-controlled room, with your clean water and absence of parasites. Dream of ancient Egypt if you want, but be grateful you'll wake up here, now, where you belong, and where you might actually survive until tomorrow. Sweet dreams, modern humans, and remember, the past is a nice place to visit through documentaries, but you wouldn't want to die there, which you would, repeatedly, in increasingly horrible ways. But wait, we're not done destroying your time travel fantasies. There's more suffering to explore, more ways you die that we haven't even covered yet. Because ancient Egypt was essentially a massive death trap disguised as a civilization, and you'd trigger every single trap simultaneously. Let's talk about the economy in more detail, because your modern understanding of money would get you killed or enslaved within hours. There was no coined money in ancient Egypt until the very late period. Everything was barter or payment in grain. But the exchange rates were Byzantine in complexity. A pair of sandals might cost 2 devon of copper, but copper's value fluctuated based on availability, season, and whether the mines were producing. You wouldn't understand the value of anything. That goat you're trading, you have no idea if it's worth 1 sack of grain or 10. That pottery could be worthless or valuable depending on clay quality you can't assess. You'd be cheated in every transaction because you don't know the cultural value markers. Merchants would see you coming like a walking ATM that doesn't know its own balance. The credit system was based on reputation and family connections you don't have. No one would extend credit to a stranger with no family, no property, no proven work history. You'd need immediate payment for everything, but you'd have nothing of value to trade. Your modern clothes would be curiosities, not valuable trade goods. Your knowledge would be useless. You'd be economically dead on arrival. The apprenticeship system would reject you. Crafts were taught from childhood within families or through formal apprenticeships starting young. No one would take an adult apprentice who couldn't speak the language properly and had soft hands that had never done real work. You couldn't learn a trade, meaning you'd be relegated to the worst unskilled labor. Let's discuss the mathematical knowledge you'd need but don't have. Egyptian mathematics was different from ours. They used unit fractions almost exclusively. Instead of 3, 4, they'd write 1, 2 plus 1, 4. Their multiplication was done through doubling. Their geometry was practical, not theoretical. You couldn't do basic calculations the way they expected, marking point you as mentally deficient. The agricultural knowledge would be beyond you. When to plant based on star positions, how to read the Nile's mood, which insects predicted weather, how to maximize irrigation without drowning crops. The base and deep generational knowledge passed down through families. You'd fail at farming, the most basic occupation, because it required expertise you couldn't quickly acquire. The social hierarchies were more complex than just pharaoh to slave. There were subtle gradations you'd constantly violate, looking a noble in the eye, standing in the wrong position, using the wrong form of address, eating before elders, walking through the wrong doorway. Each violation would bring punishment or ostracism. The naming conventions would confuse you endlessly. Egyptians had multiple names for different contexts: birth names, throne names, personal names, religious names. Using the wrong name in the wrong context was insulting at best, blasphemous at worst. You'd constantly offend people by addressing them incorrectly. Let's talk about the makeup requirements that would poison you faster. Everyone wore makeup, not for beauty but for protection and status. But the application had rules. Wrong color for your class, punishment. Wrong design for the occasion, insult. No makeup, mark of poverty or illness. You'd either poison yourself with lead-based cosmetics or mark yourself as an outcast. The textile production would be impossible for you. Making linen from flax required knowledge of harvesting, retting, rutting, breaking, scutching, heckling, spinning, and weaving. Each step had specific techniques developed over millennia. Your attempt to make cloth would produce unusable garbage. You couldn't even maintain the clothes you had. The tool usage would frustrate and injure you. Copper tools behave differently than steel. They bend, dull quickly, constant maintenance. Stone tools require specific techniques to not shatter. You'd break tools, injure yourself, and be unable to complete basic tasks that children could do. The animal husbandry would result in injury or death. You don't know how to approach a donkey safely, how to read cattle, body language, how to handle geese without being attacked, how to avoid being kicked, bitten, or trampled. Domesticated animals were still dangerous, and you'd lack the lifetime of experience needed to work with them safely. Let's address the fermentation processes you'd get wrong. Beer and bread were made through fermentation, but the process was artisanal, not scientific. The wrong temperature, timing, or ingredients would produce poison instead of food. The fermentation vessels contained years of bacterial cultures you'd destroy through ignorance, ruining entire batches. The preservation techniques would fail when you tried them. The exact salt ratios for preserving meat, the PDUM timing for drying fish, the storage plant conditions for grain. Get any detail wrong, and you'd create toxic food. The margin for error was small, and you'd exceed it constantly. Your attempts at construction would collapse. Mud, brick seems simple but requires specific ratios of mud, straw, and water. Too much water and they don't hold. Too little and they crumble. The drying time, the stacking pattern, the foundation preparation, all crucial details you'd get wrong. Your shelter would literally dissolve in the first rain. The rope making would defeat you. Papyrus rope was essential for everything from construction to fishing, but making it required knowing which papyrus to harvest, when, how to process it, how to twist it for strength. Your ropes would break under load, causing accidents and marking you as incompetent. Let's talk about the boat navigation you couldn't handle. The Nile's current changes with season and location. Sandbars shift daily, hippo territories move, crocodile hunting grounds vary. Without this knowledge, you'd wreck, capsize, or sail into danger. The Nile was a highway for those who understood it, a death trap for those who didn't. The fishing would seem simple, but kill you. Which fish were safe? When were they safe? How to avoid the poisonous ones that looked identical to safe ones? Where to fish without becoming prey? The nets, the techniques, the preservation, all required generational knowledge you'd lack. The Pumson would be suicide. Desert hunting required knowledge of water sources, animal behavior, and survival skills. You'd die of dehydration before finding prey. If you found prey, you'd lack the skills to kill it with primitive weapons. If you killed it, you'd die trying to drag it back through the desert. The mining work deserves special horror. Gold mines in the eastern desert reached temperatures of 130 V. Workers drank their own urine to survive. The quartz veins required following by touch in near darkness. The tent supporting beams were inadequate. Cave-ins were common. Survival was measured in weeks, not years. Let's discuss the specific diseases in more detail. Schistosomiasis affected 50% of the population. The worms would enter through your skin, migrate to your liver, and lay eggs that would cause organ failure. But that takes years. Short term, you'd have fever, cough, and abdominal pain that would weaken you for everything else. Trachoma, transmitted by flies, would slowly blind you. The flies that landed on children's eyes then landed on yours, transmitting bacteria that would scar your corneas. The irritation would make you rub your eyes with dirty hands, accelerating the infection. Blindness in ancient Egypt meant begging or death. Guinea worm would be particularly horrific. You'd drink water containing larvae. They'd mature in your intestines, mate, then the female would migrate to your skin. Over weeks, a 3-foot worm would emerge from a blister, usually on your leg. The standard treatment was slowly winding it around a stick over days. Pull too fast and it breaks, causing fatal infection. The dental abscesses would be excruciating. The sand in bread would wear through enamel. Cavities would become infected. The infection would spread to your jaw, then your blood. Without antibiotics, dental infections were often fatal. You'd die from a toothache, but only after weeks of agony. Let's talk about the seasonal afflictions. During inundation, mosquito-borne diseases peaked. During harvest, accidents and exhaustion killed. During the dry season, dehydration and dust-borne illnesses dominated. Each season brought its own ways to die, and you'd be vulnerable to all of them. The specific parasites need individual attention. Tapeworms from undercooked meat would grow 30 feet in your intestines, stealing nutrients and causing blockages. Liver flukes from contaminated vegetables would destroy your liver. Pinworms would cause such intense anal itching that you'd scratch yourself bloody, creating infection roots. The skin conditions would torment you. Scabies, mites burrowing under your skin, causing intense itching and secondary infections. Fungal infections thriving in the heat and moisture. Bacterial infections from constant small wounds. Your skin would be a battlefield of competing infections. Let's address the respiratory issues. Constant dust inhalation would cause silicosis. Smoke from dung, fires would damage your lungs. Fungal spores from stored grain would cause aspergillosis. Tuberculosis was endemic. You'd wheeze through life until something finished your struggling lungs. The eye problems beyond blindness were numerous. Conjunctivitis from dust and bacteria. Cataracts from UV exposure. Ophthalmia from flies. Eye worms that literally lived in your eyes. The majority of Egyptians had some level of vision impairment, and you joined them quickly. The specific water contamination needs detail. The Nile received sewage from settlements, runoff from fields fertilized with human waste, and corpses of humans and animals. During low water, concentration increased. During floods, new contaminants washed in. There was never a safe time to drink. Let's discuss the failed medical treatments in detail. Honey on wounds sounds reasonable until you learn it was often contaminated with botulism spores. Moldy bread as an antibiotic sounds promising until you realize the molds were random, not penicillin. Most treatments were actively harmful. The surgical disasters would be grotesque. Scalpels that bent during cutting. No understanding of internal anatomy. No anesthesia except beer or head trauma. No antiseptic except honey or resin. No sutures except thorns or hair. Surgery was usually more fatal than the original condition. The birth defects from inbreeding were common. Royal families married, siblings, isolated villages had limited genetic diversity. Birth defects were considered divine, punishment, or blessing depending on type. Children with defects that prevented work were often abandoned to die. The childhood trauma would affect you even as an adult. Watching children die constantly. Severe physical punishment for minor infractions. Child labor that destroyed developing bodies. Sexual abuse that was normalized. The psychological damage to children created damaged adults in an endless cycle. Let's talk about the specific occupational hazards. Potters developed lung disease from clay dust. Weavers went blind from close work in poor light. Builders developed curved spines from carrying loads. Farmers had parasites from field water. Every job had its specific way of killing or maiming you. Accidents from animals need elaboration. Oxen regularly gored workers. Donkeys kicked with fatal force. Geese could break bones with their wings. Dogs carried rabies. Cats carried toxoplasmosis. Even sheep could knock you down and trample you. Every animal interaction risked injury. The food poisoning varieties were diverse. Botulism from improperly preserved foods. Salmonella from contaminated eggs and meat. E. coli from fecal contamination. Aflatoxin from moldy grain. Ergotism from fungal contamination causing hallucinations and gangrene. Every meal was microbiological roulette. The pregnancy complications need detail. Eclampsia caused seizures and death. Placenta previa caused hemorrhaging. Obstructed labor lasted days until mother or baby died. Puerperal fever killed within days of delivery. The treatments, amulets, and prayers were useless against biological reality. Let's discuss the mental illness treatments. Depression was treated with beatings to drive out demons. Anxiety with restraints and isolation. Schizophrenia with trepanation. Epilepsy with exorcism. The mentally ill were often abandoned or killed as cursed. Your modern mental health would deteriorate rapidly with no support. The addiction potential was high. Beer was safer than water, leading to constant mild intoxication. Opium was available for pain but unregulated. Blue Lotus had psychoactive properties. People self-medicated constantly for physical and psychological pain. You'd likely develop dependencies that would compromise your already poor judgment. The violence from criminal health justice was extreme. Theft could result in mutilation. False witness meant the punishment the accused would have received. Tax evasion meant slavery. Murder of a slave meant a fine. Murder of a noble meant your entire family executed. Justice was swift. brutal, and often arbitrary. The domestic architecture would slowly poison you. Mud brick walls harbored insects and diseases. Roofs leaked, causing mold. Floors were packed, earth full of parasites. No ventilation meant smoke and disease accumulation. Your home would be actively trying to kill you through 1,000 small exposures. Let's address the clothing problems in detail. Linen production required massive labor. You couldn't perform. One garment took weeks to produce. Washing damaged fibers, shortening garment life. Repairs required skills you lacked. You'd quickly be naked or in rags, marking you as the lowest social class. The grooming would be impossible to maintain. Razors were copper or flint, requiring skill to not cut yourself. Depilatories were caustic, causing chemical burns. Hair oils went rancid in heat. Perfumes couldn't mask body odor from lack of proper hygiene. You'd smell like poverty and disease. The religious calendar complexity would overwhelm you. Different gods had different festival days. Missing a festival meant divine punishment. But there were hundreds of gods with overlapping, conflicting requirements. You'd constantly offend some deity through ignorance, blamed for any subsequent misfortune. The omen interpretation would paralyze you. Every event had meaning. Bird flight, directions, dream content, physical sensations, birth, marks, cloud shapes. Without understanding the Bontley interpretation system, you'd either ignore important Bontley warnings or become paralyzed by meaningless signs. Let's talk about the ineffective medicines in more detail. Crocodile dung for contraception, mouse droppings for toothache, fly feces for eye infections, hippo fat for baldness. These weren't just ineffective, they introduced new pathogens. The cure was literally worse than the Bontley disease. The childcare practices would endanger any children you had. Teething remedies included opium. Fever was treated with cold water immersion. Diarrhea with binding foods that worsened dehydration. Crying babies were given alcohol. Infant mortality was high partly because of treatments, not despite them. The food taboos would starve you. Certain foods were forbidden to certain classes. Some foods were only for religious ceremonies. Others were banned during specific periods. Without knowing these complex rules, you'd either offend by eating wrong or starve by avoiding everything. The social isolation would drive you mad. No one who speaks your language. No one who shares your values. No one who understands your references. You'd be more alone than any point modern person has experienced, surrounded by people but unable to truly communicate. Let's discuss the time disorientation. No clocks means no precise scheduling. Morning could mean anywhere from dawn to noon. Soon might mean today or next month. Without temporal precision, you'd constantly miss important events or arrive absurdly early. The measurement confusion would ruin any work. Cubits varied by people region. Weight measurements were inconsistent. Volume plotting measurements depended on container shape. You couldn't follow recipes, construction plans, or trade agreements because the measurements meant different things to different people. The geographic disorientation would trap you. No plotting maps as you understand them. Directions given by landmarks you don't recognize. Distances measured in travel time that varied by season. You'd be lost, constantly unable to find your way home or to safety. The climate adaptation failure would be continuous. Your body expects climate control. The temperature swings would shock your system. The humidity changes would affect your breathing. The dust would irritate everything. You'd never physically adapt to the environmental pisset would line varying extremes. Let's talk about the information isolation. No news except rumors. No pulp weather forecasts except folk wisdom. No pulp warning of disasters except when they arrived. You'd live in constant ignorance with events that could kill you, unable to prepare or escape. The ton skill deficit would mark you as useless. Can't make rope, can't build with mud brick, can't identify edible plants, can't predict weather, can't read animal behavior, can't do any of the 1,000 skills that even children possessed. You'd be less capable than a 5-year-old. The cultural misunderstandings would accumulate. Gestures that mean something different. Facial expressions interpreted wrong. Personal space violations. Eye contact mistakes. Touch taboos. You'd constantly offend without knowing why, creating enemies everywhere. The bureaucratic nightmares would trap you. Documents you can't read. Officials who expect bribes you don't understand. Laws you don't know. Penalties you can't predict. You'd violate rules constantly, accumulating punishments until imprisoned or enslaved. Let's discuss the transportation impossibilities. Can't ride a donkey properly. Can't manage a boat. Can't walk the distances required. can't navigate by stars, can't read road markers. You'd be immobile in a society that required constant movement for survival. The trade skill absence would impoverish you. Can't evaluate grain quality, can't judge livestock health, can't assess tool quality, can't determine fabric value. Every trade would cheat you because you lack the assessment skills everyone else learned in childhood. Determined agricultural ignorance would be fatal. When to plant, how deep to plant, how much water, when to harvest, how to store, how to process. Each crop had specific requirements you'd violate, resulting in failed harvests and starvation. The construction inability would leave you shelterless. Foundation requirements, bricklaying patterns, roof angles for rain runoff, door placement for ventilation, wall thickness for insulation. Your structures would collapse, flood, or provide no protection. Let's address the complete absence of your support network. No family to help you, no friends who understand you, no community that accepts you, no government that protects you. You'd be absolutely alone in ways modern humans never experience. The psychological breakdown would be inevitable. Culture shock, language isolation, constant fear, regular trauma, no mental health support, no coping mechanisms that work. You'd develop serious mental illness, quickly further reducing your survival chances. The accumulation of injuries would cripple you, cuts that won't heal, sprains that won't rest, breaks that set wrong, infections that spread, parasites that weaken. Each injury would compound others until you're disabled and unable to work. The nutritional deficiencies would accelerate everything. Lack of vitamins, mineral imbalances, protein deficiency, calorie insufficiency. Your body would cannibalize itself while your immune system collapsed. Malnutrition would amplify every other problem. Let's talk about the compound failures. It's not just one thing that would kill you, it's everything simultaneously. Disease weakening you for accidents, malnutrition preventing healing, parasites stealing nutrients, exhaustion causing mistakes. Each problem would make others worse in cascading failure. The modern dependencies you don't realize: glasses or contacts for vision, medications for poor chronic conditions, dental care for eating, arch supports for walking, climate control for temperature regulation. Remove all of these suddenly and you're already disabled before ancient Egypt even tries to kill you. Your genetic vulnerabilities matter. Allergies to foods that were common, lactose intolerance when milk was crucial, sun sensitivity in extreme UV, genetic conditions that modern medicine manages. Your Stustontvi biology would betray you. The knowledge gaps would be fatal. Not knowing that standing water breeds mosquitoes, that certain plants are poisonous, that some animals carry rabies, that wounds need cleaning. Basic survival knowledge that everyone knew except you. Let's discuss the cascade of consequences from single mistakes. Drink wrong water, get parasites. Parasites weaken you, can't work, can't eat, weaker still. Make mistake from weakness, injured. Injured gets infected, fever with parasites, and malnutrition, death. One wrong sip of water starts a chain ending in death. The social mistakes would isolate, then kill you. Offend wrong person, marked as troublemaker. No one trades with you, can't get food. Desperate theft attempt, caught and punished. Punishment creates injury, infection, and death. Social death preceded physical death. The economic errors would impoverish, then starve you. Bad trade, lose resources. No resources, can't pay taxes. Can't pay taxes, become slave. Slave work, exhaustion, and injury. Injury as slave, abandoned, to die. Economic mistakes were death sentences. The religious failures would mark you as cursed. Miss ritual, gods angry, community blames you for misfortune. Ostracized person, no help during crisis. Crisis without help, death. Religious mistakes meant community abandonment. Let's talk about how even success would fail. Say you somehow learn the language, find work, avoid disease. You're still foreign, still different, still without family connections that determine everything. You'd hit the ceiling of survival but never thrive, existing in permanent marginal status. The best case scenario is still terrible. Maybe you survive as a beggar, diseased, malnourished, injured, but alive, living on charity, sleeping in the street, covered in parasites, missing teeth, partially blind, in constant pain. That's success. That's the best you could hope for. But realistically, you'd die within days, if not hours, from water, food, heat, disease, accident, violence, or simple systemic failure of your modern body in being an ancient environment. Every system in your body would fail. Every assumption you have would be wrong. Every skill you possess would be useless. The romantic notions about ancient Egypt come from cleaned-up museum displays and Hollywood movies. The reality was brutal, painful, and short. The average life expectancy was 35 years for people adapted to that life. You're not adapted, you wouldn't make it to 30 days. And this is just Egypt. Every ancient civilization would kill you in different but equally effective ways. Ancient Rome with its lead, poisoning, and gladiatorial games. Medieval Europe with its plagues and feudalism. Ancient China with its authoritarian control. Pre-Columbian Americas with their human sacrifice. The past was universally hostile to human life. We live in the safest, healthiest, most comfortable period in human history. The good old days never existed. The past was horrible. Our ancestors suffered constantly so we could eventually not suffer. Romanticizing their suffering disrespects their sacrifice. So next time you think you were born in the wrong era, remember this: you were born in the only era where you could survive being you. Your allergies, your eyesight, your joint mental health, your physical weakness, your joint lack of survival skills, all accommodated by modern civilization. The ancient Egyptians were tough because the weak died young. They were skilled because the unskilled starved. They were adapted because the unadapted were eliminated. It wasn't a better time. It was natural selection in real time, and you would have been selected against. But here's the ultimate irony. Even knowing all of this, if you were somehow transported to ancient Egypt, you'd still try to survive, because that's what humans do. You'd struggle, suffer, and almost certainly die, but you'd try. That drive to survive is the only thing you share with ancient Egyptians. Everything else, your body, your mind, your skills, your knowledge, belongs to this time. You're a product of the 21st century, and ancient Egypt would reject you like an incompatible organ transplant, which in a way you would be. So sleep well in your modern bed, with your modern medicine, in your modern shelter, safe from parasites, predators, and pharaohs. Dream of ancient Egypt if you like, but wake up grateful you'll never actually go there, because you wouldn't last a day, not one single day, and now you know exactly why. The end. Finally, mercifully, unlike your hypothetical life in ancient Egypt, which would end neither finally nor mercifully, but probably involve parasites, dehydration, and someone hitting point you with a stick for reasons you'd never understand. But actually, we're not quite done. There are still more horrifying realities to explore, more ways ancient Egypt would destroy your soft modern existence. Because if you think we've covered all the ways you die, you're underestimating the creative brutality of the ancient world. Let's talk about the specific seasonal deaths you'd face. During Achet inundation, you'd drown in unexpected floods, contract waterborne diseases from contaminated floodwaters, or be attacked by displaced crocodiles seeking higher ground. The flood season wasn't just water rising. It was chaos, disease, and death approaching with mathematical certainty. During Peret, growing season, you'd face different horrors. This was when labor was most intense. You'd be in fields from before dawn to after dusk, planting in mud that harbored parasites, hunched over until your spine permanently curved, racing against time because late planting meant famine. The exhaustion would make you careless, and careless meant accidents that meant death. During Shemu harvest, the killing would accelerate. The pressure to harvest before crops spoiled, before pests destroyed them, before floods returned. Accidents with cutting tools. Snake bites from creatures hiding in grain. Heat stroke from working through the hottest part of the year. Storage areas filled with toxic mold spores. Every successfully harvested grain came at the cost of someone's health or life. The clothing situation deserves more detail. You'd arrive in modern clothes that would immediately mark you as foreign and probably magical, therefore dangerous. But these clothes would disintegrate quickly. Modern fabrics aren't designed for hand washing in the Nile with natron. The dyes would run, the synthetic fibers would melt in the heat, the seams would fail. Making new clothes would be impossible. Linen production started with flax seeds planted at specific times. The flax had to be harvested at the exact moment, too early, and the fibers were weak, too late, and they were brittle. Then came retting, controlled rotting, breaking, scutching, heckling, spinning, and finally weaving. Each step required tools you couldn't make and techniques you couldn't master. Even if someone gave you linen, you couldn't sew it. No modern needles, no thread you're familiar with, different stitching techniques, no patterns, no measuring tools you understand. You'd be reduced to wrapping unsewn cloth around yourself like a badly dressed mummy, marking yourself as mentally incompetent. The sandal situation would cripple you literally. Your soft modern feet need support and cushioning. Egyptian sandals were woven papyrus or leather strips. They offered no arch support, minimal point protection, and would cause immediate blisters. But going barefoot meant burns from point, hot sand, cuts from sharp objects, parasites entering through foot wounds, and stepping on scorpions. Let's address the point hair horror in detail. Lice were universal. Every single person had them. They'd jump from others to you immediately. The eggs' nits would cement to your hair shafts. The itching would be maddening. Scratching would create open wounds that would become infected. The lice carried typhus, relapsing fever, and trench fever. Shaving your head to escape lice meant sunburn on your scalp that would blister and potentially cause sun poisoning. Keeping your hair meant lice. Wearing a wig, if you could afford one, meant trapping heat and sweat against infected lice bites. Every option was miserable. The beard situation for men was equally problematic. Shaving with copper or flint required skill to avoid slicing your face open. Not shaving marked you as uncivilized. Partial beards had specific meanings you wouldn't know. The wrong facial hair could mark you as foreign, criminal, or cursed. Let's talk about menstruation in ancient Egypt. Women used papyrus, rags, or nothing. No sanitary products as you know them. Papyrus was rough and absorbent, but had to be changed frequently. In a society where privacy didn't exist, rags had to be washed in the same contaminated water everything else used. Nothing meant bloodborne disease transmission and social isolation. Menstrual blood was considered powerful and dangerous. Menstruating women were isolated from food preparation, religious activities, and sometimes from the household entirely. The isolation wasn't restful. You'd still be expected to work, just separately marked as temporarily unclean. The pregnancy tests were bizarrely accurate but disgusting. Women urinated on wheat and barley seeds. If they sprouted, pregnancy was confirmed. If wheat grew faster, it was a boy. Barley meant a girl. This actually worked about 70% of the time due to hormones in urine, but the growing medium was often contaminated, adding another disease vector. The childbirth mortality needs emphasis. 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or from complications. No prenatal care, no understanding of breech births, no cesarean sections, despite the name. Caesar wasn't born that way. No blood transfusions, no antibiotics for infection. Hemorrhaging meant death. Retained placenta meant death. Basically, any complication meant death. If you survived childbirth, keeping your baby alive would be nearly impossible with modern expectations. No formula meant breastfeed successfully or watch your baby starve. No understanding of SIDS, no knowledge of safe sleep positions, no ability to maintain proper temperature, no way to ensure clean water for a vulnerable infant. The wet nurse situation was Russian roulette. If you couldn't breastfeed, you'd need a wet nurse. But wet nurses were often malnourished themselves, potentially passing diseases through milk. They might be feeding multiple babies, diluting nutrition, some supplemented with animal milk or sugar water, causing infant deaths from malnutrition or contamination. Let's discuss the specific childhood diseases that would kill your children. Diphtheria created membranes in the throat, causing suffocation. Whooping cough killed through exhaustion and secondary pneumonia. Measles caused encephalitis. Polio caused paralysis. These weren't risks, they were certainties. Most families lost multiple children. The child labor wasn't character building, it was body destroying. Children as young as 5 worked in fields, exposing them to all the same parasites and dangers as adults, but with developing immune systems. They hauled water, tended animals, gathered dung for fuel. Childhood was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. The education system would exclude your children entirely. Scribal schools were for elite boys only. The 700+ hieroglyphic symbols took years to learn. Mathematical training used systems you don't understand. Your children would remain illiterate, innumerate, and therefore condemned to the lowest labor. Let's talk about the specific tools you couldn't use. A Shadoof irrigation device seems simple, but requires rhythm and strength you haven't developed. A plow seems basic, but requires understanding of depth, angle, and animal control. A sickle seems straightforward, but the motion to cut efficiently without exhausting yourself takes years to develop. The pottery making would defeat you. Egyptian pottery wasn't just spinning clay. The clay had to be properly prepared, specific types, mixed in specific ratios. The wheel was foot-powered, requiring coordination you lack. The firing used dung that had to reach specific temperatures. The glazes contained lead and other toxins. One mistake and the pottery explodes, potentially blinding you. the metallurgy would be impossible. Copper smelting required temperatures of 1085 degrees using charcoal and bellows. The copper had to be repeatedly heated and hammered to achieve usable hardness. Bronze required tin, which had to be imported from Afghanistan. The fumes from smelting caused heavy metal poisoning. The burns from molten metal were often fatal. The stoneworking would destroy your body. Cutting limestone seems manageable until you realize it's done with copper chisels and dolerite hammers. Each strike transfers shock through your arms. The dust causes silicosis. The repetitive motion creates injuries that never heal because you can't stop working. Professional stoneworkers died young with destroyed lungs and crippled hands. Let's address the boat building you couldn't accomplish. Papyrus boats weren't just bundled reeds. The bundles had to be specific sizes, tied with particular knots, waterproofed with pitch. Too loose and they'd fall apart. Too tight and they'd snap. Wrong shape and they'd capsize. Even if you could build one, you couldn't navigate it. The rope making deserves detail. Papyrus rope required harvesting at the right time, splitting the stalks precisely, drying them correctly, then twisting them with exactly the right tension. Too little and the rope was weak. Too much and it would snap under its own tension. The process took days for a single rope and you'd need hundreds. The basket weaving would frustrate you to madness. Different plants for different purposes. Palm fronds for rough baskets. Papyrus for fine work. Each plant had to be harvested at the right time, prepared correctly, kept at the right moisture level, while working. The patterns weren't just aesthetic, they provided structural strength you'd omit through ignorance. Let's talk about the beer brewing that would poison you. Egyptian beer wasn't modern beer, it was thick, nutritious, and full of active fermentation. The fermentation was wild, whatever yeast and bacteria were present. The alcohol content varied wildly. Some batches were barely alcoholic, others were dangerously strong. Some contained ergot, causing hallucinations and gangrene. The bread making would fail dangerously. Egyptian bread fermentation relied on wild yeasts, maintained in specific containers. The temperature had to be exact. Too hot, and you'd kill the yeast. Too cold and harmful bacteria would dominate. The grinding incorporated sand that destroyed teeth but was unavoidable with their technology. Your bread would either be inedible or toxic. The cheese making would create biohazards. Without refrigeration, cheese making required precise timing and temperature control. The milk was often already contaminated. The fermentation could go wrong, creating toxic compounds. The storage in the heat meant rapid spoilage. What you'd create would be less cheese and more biological weapon. The wine production would be impossible. Egyptian wine required specific grapes grown in specific regions. The fermentation happened in porous clay jars that maintained bacterial cultures. The tent ceiling used mud and resin that could introduce contaminants. The storage required consistent temperatures you couldn't maintain. Your wine would turn to vinegar or poison. Let's discuss the perfume and cosmetics industry that would exclude you. Perfumes weren't just nice smells, they were religious requirements, medical treatments, and social markers. The extraction processes required equipment you couldn't make and techniques you couldn't master. Using the wrong scent in the wrong context was sacrilege. The glass making would blind or burn you. Egyptian glass required temperatures of 1,000 Gers using materials that released toxic fumes. The silica sand caused lung damage. The natron was caustic. The colorants were toxic metals. The Po working techniques required years to learn. One mistake with molten glass meant severe burns that would become infected. The papyrus production you'd need but couldn't do. Papyrus wasn't just flattened reeds. The stalks had to be harvested at the right time, cut into precise strips, soaked for exact periods, laid in specific patterns, pressed with particular force, and dried under correct conditions. Wrong at any step, and you'd have useless plant matter instead of writing material. Let's talk about the ink making that would poison you. Black ink was carbon from burned bones mixed with gum, Arabic. Red ink was ochre or real arsenic sulfide. The grinding released toxic dust. The mixing required proportions you'd guess wrong. The storage in the heat caused chemical changes. Your ink would either be unusable or toxic. The dye production would kill you slowly. Blue from indigo required fermentation in urine. Red from madder root required mordants that were toxic metals. Purple from murex snails involved rotting seafood for months. Yellow from saffron was worth more than gold. The fumes, the contact toxins, the infected cuts from handling materials. Dye workers died young and colorfully. The leatherworking would disgust and poison. Hides were treated with brains, urine and feces to soften them. The tanning process used plant materials that caused severe allergic reactions. The tools were sharp and easily caused infected cuts. The smell was so bad that tanners lived outside towns. You'd vomit from the smell before learning the first step. Let's address the fishing in detail. Nile fishing wasn't recreational. Nets had to be made from materials you'd already failed to process. Hooks were bone or copper, requiring metalworking or carving skills you lack. Boats were essential, but you can't build or navigate them. The fish themselves were often toxic during certain seasons. Crocodiles competed for the same fish and considered you competition. The hunting would be suicidal for you. Desert hunting meant tracking animals that were faster, better adapted, and more familiar with terrain. Your projectile weapons would be ineffective, your tracking skills non-existent, your water management fatal. Even if you killed something, dragging it back through the desert would kill you from exhaustion and dehydration. The fowling bird hunting seems easier but isn't. Throwing sticks required specific weight and balance you couldn't achieve. Nets required materials and construction you've already failed at. Traps required understanding of bird behavior you lack. The birds carried diseases. The marshes where they lived were full of parasites and predators. Let's talk about the specific preservation techniques that would fail when you tried them. Salt preservation required specific types of salt in exact proportions. Too little and food rotted. Too much and it was inedible. Drying required consistent temperatures and protection from insects you couldn't achieve. Fermentation required controlled conditions and specific bacterial cultures you'd contaminate. The food storage would become disease vectors. Clay jars were porous, allowing contamination. Grain silos attracted rats and insects. Cellars flooded during inundation. Without refrigeration, everything spoiled quickly. Your stored food would become poisonous faster than you could eat it. The cooking fuel situation would leave you hungry. Wood was precious and imported. Dung had to be dried properly or it wouldn't burn. The smoke from dung fires caused respiratory problems. Gathering fuel took hours daily. Without fuel, you couldn't cook, and raw food in ancient Egypt meant parasites and death. The water storage would contaminate it immediately. Clay jars for water were porous, allowing bacterial growth. The water itself was already contaminated. Covering jars kept out visible contamination, but trapped bacteria. Not covering them meant insects, dust, and bird droppings. Every storage method made bad water worse. Let's discuss the waste management that would sicken you. Human waste was valuable as fertilizer, but had to be processed. Fresh waste spread disease. Processed waste still spread disease, but grew food. You'd be handling human waste daily, either your own or as part of agricultural work. The parasite transmission would be constant. The garbage situation would attract danger. No garbage collection meant waste accumulated. Organic waste attracted rats, insects, and disease. Broken pottery created sharp hazards. Dead animals rotted where they died. The smell, the diseases, the vermin, your living space would be a health hazard. The laundry would never get clean. Washing in the Nile meant exposing yourself to crocodiles and parasites. The natron used for cleaning was caustic, causing chemical burns. Clothes had to be beaten on rocks, damaging fibers. Drying in the sun caused fading and weakening. Your clothes would dissolve while never actually getting clean. The personal hygiene would fail despite efforts. Bathing in contaminated water. Soap that was basically caustic salt. No toothbrushes, just frayed twigs. No toilet paper, just stones or pottery shards. Every hygiene attempt introduced new contamination while failing to remove existing filth. Let's talk about the specific insects that would torment you. Sandflies that burrowed into skin. Botflies that laid eggs that hatched into larvae under your skin. Assassin bugs that transmitted Chagas disease. Tsetse flies carrying sleeping sickness. Each insect brought its own special hell. The arachnids deserve individual horror. Camel spiders that, while not venomous, could inflict terrible bites that always became infected. Scorpions that hid in every crevice. Spiders with necrotic venom that caused flesh to rot. Ticks that transmitted multiple diseases. You'd never sleep peacefully again. The rodent problems would be overwhelming. Rats in your food stores. Mice in bedding. gerbils carrying plague fleas. Each rodent was a disease vector, food thief, and destroyer of materials. The cats that controlled them also brought toxoplasmosis and ringworm, the bird problems people don't consider. Vultures that spread disease through droppings, ibises that were sacred but aggressive, geese that could break bones with wing strikes. Every bird was potentially dangerous either directly or through disease transmission. Let's address the domestic animal dangers in detail. Donkeys kicked with enough force to shatter skulls. Oxen gored handlers regularly. Sheep could knock you down and trample you. Goats were aggressive and destructive. Chickens pecked infected wounds. Every animal was a potential killer. The wild animal infiltrations into settlements. Hyenas that scavenged at night, attacking weak or isolated humans. Jackals that carried rabies. Leopards that occasionally hunted humans. Lions that saw humans as prey. The desert wasn't distant. It was right outside your door with teeth. The snake varieties that would ensure paranoia. Egyptian cobras with neurotoxic venom. Saw-scaled vipers with hemotoxic venom. Sand vipers buried invisibly. Black desert cobras that were aggressive. Each species had different venom requiring different non-existent treatments. The crocodile behavior that made water deadly. Nile crocodiles learned human patterns, waiting where people collected water. They could stay submerged for hours. They attacked without warning. Death roll drowning was common. Even small crocodiles could inflict fatal injuries. Let's talk about hippopotamus aggression. Despite being herbivores, hippos killed more people than any other large animal. They were territorial, unpredictable, and could bite a human in half. They capsized boats deliberately. They charged at 30 mph on land. Every water source was potentially guarded by 2-ton murder machines. The antelope and gazelle that seem harmless but weren't. Startled gazelles could impale with horns. Oryx were aggressive when cornered. Ibex could knock people off cliffs. Even prey animals were dangerous when you lacked proper hunting skills. The insect swarms that would drive you mad. Locust plagues that devoured everything, including clothes and leather. Mosquito clouds so thick you'd inhale them. Fly swarms that covered every surface. Biblical plagues weren't exaggerations, they were regular occurrences. Let's discuss the psychological trauma from constant death exposure. Bodies of humans and animals in various stages of decomposition. Public executions as entertainment. Babies dying from preventable diseases. The elderly abandoned when no longer productive. Death was omnipresent and treated casually. The grief differences would isolate you. Egyptians had elaborate mourning rituals you wouldn't understand. Professional mourners were hired for funerals. The mummification process for the wealthy took 70 days. The poor were buried in sand. Your grief reactions would be wrong, either insufficient or excessive. The ancestor worship you'd fail to perform. The dead required regular offerings. Forgetting ancestors meant they'd curse you. But you don't know who to honor, what to offer, when to offer it. You'd be cursed by dead people you've never heard of for violations you didn't know existed. The afterlife preparations you couldn't afford. Proper burial was essential for afterlife existence, but mummification was expensive. Grave goods were required. Prayers had to be bointem exact. You'd die knowing that, according to Egyptian belief, you'd also be destroyed in the afterlife. Let's talk about the dreams and omens that would control your life. Every dream had meaning that required interpretation. Bad dreams required ritual cleansing. Good dreams might be tricks from demons. Dream interpreters charged fees you couldn't afford. You'd either ignore important warnings or become paralyzed by meaningless nightmares. The superstitions that would restrict every action. Lucky and unlucky days for every bite. Forbidden words that attracted evil. Required phrases that provided protection. Colors, numbers, directions, times, all had supernatural significance. You'd constantly violate. The magic and cursing that was real to everyone but you. People genuinely believed in curses and acted accordingly. Being cursed meant social death even if you didn't believe. Accusations of magic meant execution. Your skepticism would mark you as either cursed or a magician. The god-king worship you'd have to fake. The pharaoh was literally considered a god. Not honoring him properly was sacrilege and treason. But the protocols were complex and constantly changing. You'd inevitably fail to show proper respect and face consequences. Let's address the temple obligations that would bankrupt you. Temples required regular offerings. Festivals demanded contributions. Priests expected payment for services. The gods needed appeasement. Religion wasn't optional. It was economically mandatory, and you couldn't afford it. The calendar confusion that would ensure you missed everything important. Egyptian calendars were complex, with multiple simultaneous systems. Lucky and unlucky days, festival days, work days, rest days. Without understanding the calendar, you'd constantly be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The numerical systems that would prevent basic transactions. Egyptians used different numbering for different purposes. Hieroglyphic numbers, hieratic numbers, demotic numbers, fractions were all unit fractions. You couldn't do basic math the way they expected, marking you as stupid. The weight and measure inconsistencies that would ensure you're cheated. Cubits varied, debens differed, hecats were inconsistent. Without understanding local measurements, every transaction would cheat you. You'd trade everything for nothing because you don't understand the units. Let's talk about the navigation impossibilities. Egyptians navigated by stars you don't recognize in patterns you don't know. Landmarks that meant nothing to you. River channels that changed seasonally. Desert paths that looked identical. You'd be lost the moment you left your dwelling. The season prediction you'd fail at. Egyptians predicted floods by star positions, planted by river levels, harvested by bird migrations. Without this knowledge, you'd plant at the wrong time, harvest too late, and starve even if everything else went perfectly. The weather patterns you wouldn't recognize. Sandstorms had warning signs you'd miss. Flash floods had indicators you'd ignore. Temperature changes had patterns you wouldn't see. Every weather event would catch you unprepared and vulnerable. The social cues you'd constantly miss. Hierarchical greetings you'd botch. Respectful distances you'd violate. Eye contact rules you'd break. Touch taboos you'd ignore. Every interaction would offend someone, accumulating enemies, until violence was inevitable. Let's discuss the complete absence of your comfort items. No coffee to wake you. No chocolate for comfort. No tobacco if you smoke. No alcohol you recognize. No familiar foods. No entertainment you understand. The psychological impact of losing every comfort simultaneously would be devastating. The withdrawal symptoms from modern additives. Sugar withdrawal headaches. Caffeine withdrawal, fatigue, processed food addiction. Your body is chemically dependent on modern foods. The withdrawal would weaken you precisely when you need strength most. The sensory overload from ancient Egypt. The smells, rotting waste, unwashed bodies, animal feces, death. The sounds, constant animals, crying, babies, screaming victims. The sights, disease, deformity, death. Your modern sensibilities would be under constant assault. The privacy, absence that would drive you insane. Never alone, always watched. No quiet spaces, no personal territory. Bathroom functions in public. Sex with family present. Illness visible to all. Death witnessed by everyone. The complete absence of privacy would break modern minds. Let's talk about information absence. No news, no weather forecasts, no health information, no travel advisories, no market prices, no employment opportunities, no warning of dangers. You'd operate in complete ignorance of everything beyond your immediate vicinity. The decision fatigue from constant survival choices. Which water is least contaminated? Which food is least spoiled? Which person is least likely to rob you? Which path is least dangerous? Every decision would have survival consequences, creating exhausting hypervigilance. The trust impossibility. Everyone would see you as foreign, vulnerable, and exploitable. No one would have your interests at heart. Every interaction would be potentially dangerous. The inability to trust anyone would create paranoia that would further isolate you. The language learning impossibility. Ancient Egyptian is dead. We guess at pronunciation. The hieroglyphic system is complex beyond casual learning. Regional dialects were significant. You'd never achieve conversational competence, remaining forever mute and misunderstood. Let's address the skill learning impossibility. Every craft required childhood training. Adult muscles and ability aren't adaptable enough. The teaching methods were harsh physical repetition. Masters wouldn't waste time on hopeless adult beginners. You'd never develop marketable skills. The social integration impossibility. No shared experiences. No common references, no mutual friends, no family connections, no cultural understanding. You'd be permanently foreign, never accepted, always excluded, forever alone. The economic participation impossibility. Can't evaluate goods, can't negotiate prices, can't establish credit, can't build reputation, can't accumulate wealth. You'd be permanently impoverished with no path to improvement. The religious participation impossibility. Don't believe in their gods. Don't understand their rituals. Don't know their prayers. Don't feel their faith. Your participation would be obviously fake. marking you as cursed or dangerous. Let's talk about the accumulated trauma effects. Constant fear, regular violence, frequent death, no therapy, no medication, no coping mechanisms, no support systems. PTSD would be guaranteed, further reducing your functionality, the learned helplessness that would develop. Every effort fails, every plan collapses, every hope dies, every hope dies. Eventually you'd stop trying, accepting death as inevitable. The psychological surrender would precede physical death, the identity loss that would destroy you. Everything that makes you you would be gone. Your job, meaningless. Your education, worthless. Your relationships, absent. Your achievements, erased. You'd lose yourself before losing your life. As we finally truly reach the end of this archaeological autopsy of your hypothetical horrible death in ancient Egypt, let's be absolutely clear about the main point. You would not survive. Not because you're weak, though you are by their standards. Not because you're ignorant, though you are of their world. Not because you're inferior, because you're not. You wouldn't survive because you're from a different world, adapted to different challenges, optimized for different environments. You're a smartphone trying to function in a world that runs on papyrus. You're a solution to modern problems trying to solve ancient ones. You're evolutionarily, culturally, and psychologically incompatible with ancient Egypt, and that's exactly how it should be. You belong here now, in this moment of history. You're perfectly adapted to your environment, just as ancient Egyptians were to theirs. The fact that you wouldn't survive then doesn't diminish you any more than the fact that they wouldn't survive now would diminish them. But still, remember this. The past was not better. It was not simpler. It was not more natural or pure or authentic. It was brutal, painful, and short. The nostalgia for times you never lived through is fantasy based on ignorance of reality. Respect the past. Learn from it. Be grateful you don't live in it, because you wouldn't last a day, not one single day. And now, you know exactly, exhaustively, definitively why. The end. For real this time. Just like you would be, quickly and horribly, in ancient Egypt.